For commentary based on the Book of Ecclesiastes after the news. Today is November 26, 2017, and these are the stories that matter. Headline: Congress coming back to crush of business in fraught time. The crush of unfinished business facing lawmakers when they return to the Capitol would be daunting even if Washington were functioning at peak efficiency. It's an agenda whose core items, tax cuts, a potential government shutdown, and lots of leftover spending bills, could unravel just as easily as advance in factionalism, gamesmanship, and a toxic political environment. There's only a 4-week window until a Christmas deadline, barely enough for complicated negotiations, even if December stays on the rails. President Trump and congressional leaders plan a meeting Tuesday to discuss how to sidestep a shutdown and work through the legislative to-do list. For the optimistic, it's plain that Democrats and Republicans have reasons to cooperate, particularly on spending increases for the Pentagon and domestic agencies whose budgets otherwise would be frozen. An additional round of hurricane aid should be bipartisan, and efforts to reauthorize a popular health care program for children seem to be on track. Republicans are advancing their tax cut measure under special rules that means Senate Democrats cannot use delaying tactics. The measure passed the House just before the Thanksgiving break and moves to the Senate floor this coming week. After the Senate GOP's failure on health care this summer, the majority party is under enormous pressure to produce a victory on taxes. Still, GOP deficit hawks such as Senators Bob Corker of Tennessee and Jeff Flake of Arizona remain uneasy about the overhaul. While Democrats are largely sidelined on taxes, they hold leverage over a mix of budget-related issues. First, there's the need to avert a government shutdown after a temporary spending bill expires on December 8th. The most likely scenario, congressional aides say, is for an additional extension until Christmas. On a parallel track are talks to raise spending limits that are keeping agency budgets essentially frozen unless those caps are raised. If that happens, then negotiations could begin in earnest on a massive catch-all spending measure in hopes of having it signed into law by year's end. Taxes have gotten all the attention so far, but the showdown over a potential shutdown right before Christmas could soon take center stage. Democrats are counting on GOP fears of a holiday season closure to ensure Republican concessions during December talks. Both sides would have to make concessions that may upset partisans in either party. Just as House Speaker Paul Ryan fears a revolt on the right, House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi risks an uprising on her left. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer round out the quartet of top negotiators. Quote, "Everybody's got complicated politics. The chance of short-term failure is pretty high, short-term failure being a shutdown," end quote, said Steve Emmeldorf, a Democratic lobbyist. Talks on the spending caps are stuck, however, aides say. A GOP offer to lift the Pentagon budget by more than $54 billion next year and non-defense limits by $37 billion was rejected by Democrats demanding balance between the two sides of the ledger. Long-delayed battles over immigration and Trump's promised wall along the U.S.-Mexico border are huge obstacles. Many Democrats whose votes are needed on the spending bills insist they won't vote for any legislation that includes the wall. Trump remains dead set on his $1.6 billion request for a down payment on the project. Those same Democrats also insist that Congress must act by year's end to protect immigrants who were brought to the U.S. illegally as children and whose protected status is set to lapse next year. Trump backs the idea despite issuing an executive order reversing the Obama administration protections starting next spring. Conservatives oppose drawing in the immigration issue to legislation to keep the government running. Hurricane relief is adding one more wrinkle. Congress has approved more than $50 billion in aid in response to a series of devastating hurricanes. The most recent request by the White House is the largest yet at $44 billion. But it's not nearly enough to satisfy the powerful Texas delegation, which is pressing behind the scenes for more. Quote, "completely inadequate," end quote, said Rep. John Culberson, a Republican of Texas. We must do far more to rebuild, repair, and allow Texans to return to normal as quickly as possible. President Trump is a wild card. He warmed to the idea of cutting deals with Democrats after a September pact with Schumer and Pelosi to lift the government's debt ceiling. He promised Democratic leaders that he would sign legislation to give the young immigrants legal status, provided border security is addressed as well. But that demand on border security came with a long list of conditions subsequently added by the White House. Among them, building his Mexico border wall, overhauling the green card system, and strengthening measures against people who stay after their visas expire. Headline: Trump wants to end welfare as Bill Clinton knows it. Overhauling welfare was one of the defining goals of Bill Clinton's presidency, starting with a campaign promise to, quote, end welfare as we know it, end quote, continuing with a bitter policy fight and producing change that remains hotly debated 20 years later. Now, President Donald Trump wants to put his stamp on the welfare system, apparently in favor of a more restrictive policy. He says, quote, people are taking advantage of the system, end quote. Trump, who has been signaling interest in the issue for some time, said this past week that he wants to tackle the issue after the tax overhaul he is seeking by the end of the year. He said changes were, quote, desperately needed in our country, end quote, and that his administration would soon offer plans. For now, the president has not offered details. Spokeswoman Sarah Huckabee Sanders said more specifics were due likely early next year. But the groundwork has already begun at the White House, and Trump has made his interest known to Republican lawmakers. Paul Winfrey, Director of Budget Policy and Deputy Director of Trump's Domestic Policy Council, told a recent gathering at the conservative Heritage Foundation that he and another staffer had been charged with, quote, working on a major welfare reform proposal, end quote. He said they have drafted an executive order on the topic that would outline administration principles and direct agencies to come up with recommendations. Quote, the president really wants to lead on this, end quote, Winfrey said. Quote, he has delivered that message loud and clear to us. We've opened conversations with leadership in Congress to let them know that this is the direction we are heading. Trump said in October that welfare was, quote, becoming a very, very big subject and people are taking advantage of the system, end quote. Clinton ran in 1992 on a promise to change the system, but struggled to get consensus on a bill, with Democrats divided and Republicans pushing aggressive changes. 4 years later, he signed a law that replaced a federal entitlement with grants to the states, placed a time limit on how long families could get aid, and required recipients to go to work eventually. It has drawn criticism from some liberal quarters ever since. During her presidential campaign last year, Democrat Hillary Clinton faced activists who argued that the law fought for by her husband punished poor people. Catherine Eden, a professor at Johns Hopkins University who has been studying welfare since the 1990s, said the law's legacy has been to limit the cash assistance available to the very poor and has never become a, quote, springboard to work, end quote. She questioned what kinds of changes could be made, arguing that the welfare benefits are minimal in many states and there is little evidence of fraud in other anti-poverty programs. Still, Eden said that welfare has, quote, never been popular even from its inception. It doesn't sit well with Americans in general, end quote. Robert Rector, a senior research fellow at Heritage, said he would like to see more work requirements for a range of anti-poverty programs and stronger marriage incentives, as well as strategies to improve results for social programs and to limit waste. He said while the administration could make some adjustments through executive order, legislation would be required for any major change. Quote, this is a good system. We just need to make the system better, end quote, he said. Administration officials have already suggested they are eyeing anti-poverty programs. Trump's initial 2018 budget proposal, outlined in March, sought to sharply reduce spending for Medicaid, food stamps, and student loan subsidies, among other programs. Budget Director Mike Mulvaney said this year, quote, if you are on food stamps and you are able-bodied, we need you to go to work. Headline: Black Friday, Thanksgiving online sales climb to record high. Black Friday and Thanksgiving online sales in the United States surged to record highs as shoppers bagged deep discounts and bought more on their mobile devices, heralding a promising start to the key holiday season. U.S. retailers raked in a record $7.9 billion in online sales on Black Friday and Thanksgiving, up 17.9% from a year ago, according to Adobe Analytics, which measures transactions at the largest 100 U.S. web retailers. Adobe said Cyber Monday is expected to drive $6.6 billion in internet sales, which would make it the largest U.S. online shopping day in history. In the run-up to the holiday weekend, traditional retailers invested heavily in improving their websites and bulking up delivery options, preempting a decline in visits to brick-and-mortar stores. Several chains tightened store inventories as well to ward off any post-holiday liquidation that would weigh on profits. TVs, laptops, toys, and gaming consoles, including the PlayStation 4, were among the most heavily discounted and the biggest sellers, according to retail analysts and consultants. Commerce marketing firm Criteo said 40% of Black Friday online purchases were made on mobile phones, up from 29% last year. No brick-and-mortar sales data for Thanksgiving or Black Friday was immediately available, but Reuters reporters and industry analysts noted anecdotal signs of muted activity, fewer cars in mall parking lots, shoppers leaving stores without purchases in hand. Stores offered heavy discounts, creative gimmicks, and free gifts to draw bargain hunters out of their homes, but some shoppers said they were just browsing the merchandise, reserving their cash for internet purchases. There was little evidence of the delirious shopper frenzy customary of Black Fridays from past years. Stores offered heavy discounts, creative gimmicks, and free gifts to draw bargain hunters out of their homes, but some shoppers said they were just browsing the merchandise, reserving their cash for internet purchases. There was little evidence of the delirious shopper frenzy customary of Black Fridays from past years. However, retail research firm ShopperTrack said store traffic fell less than 1% on Black Friday, bucking industry predictions of a sharper decline. Quote, "There has been a significant amount of debate surrounding the shifting importance of brick-and-mortar retail," end quote, Brian Field, ShopperTrack's senior director of advisory services, said. Quote, "The fact that shopper visits remained intact on Black Friday illustrates that physical retail is still highly relevant, and when done right, it is profitable," end quote. The National Retail Federation, which had predicted strong holiday sales helped by rising consumer confidence, said on Friday that fair weather across much of the nation had also helped draw shoppers into stores. The Federation, whose overall industry sales data is closely watched each year, is scheduled to release Thanksgiving, Black Friday, and Cyber Monday sales numbers on Tuesday. Headline: Funeral held for U.S. border agent whose death not explained. Family, friends, and law enforcement officers converged on a Catholic church in El Paso, Texas, Saturday to mourn a Border Patrol agent whose death last weekend in the rugged and remote Big Bend area has not been explained. Bagpipes played as Border Patrol pallbearers in green uniforms carried the U.S. flag-draped coffin of Rogelio Martinez, 36, into Our Lady of Guadalupe Church for a private funeral mass. He died in a hospital Sunday of head and other injuries. Quote, "It honors him to see law enforcement agencies from across the United States attend the service," end quote, Border Patrol spokesman Ramiro Cordero told reporters outside the church. Martinez was found November 18th in a culvert in a rugged area near Van Horn, about 30 miles from the border with Mexico and 110 miles southeast of El Paso. He was found along with a seriously injured partner whose name has not been released. Attorney General Jeff Sessions was scheduled to attend the funeral, but it was not clear if he was there. Following the funeral, a graveside ceremony was held at Rest Lawn Cemetery in El Paso. Speculation about the cause of death has run rampant, with several politicians saying the agent was attacked, including President Donald Trump, who used the death to highlight his support for building a wall on the border with Mexico. Special Agent in Charge Emerson Bowie Jr. in the FBI's El Paso office has said investigators were treating the incident as a, quote, potential assault, end quote, but they could not rule out other scenarios. Representatives from the Border Patrol's union have insisted that the incident was an attack based on the accounts of other agents who responded to the scene. Chris Cabrera, a spokesman for the National Border Patrol Council, told the Associated Press that agents responding to the scene called it, quote, grisly. However, a U.S. official with knowledge of the investigation told the Associated Press on Monday that the agents may have fallen and that the surviving agent had no memory of his duty shift. Those are the stories that matter this day, November 26, 2017. Please hold for commentary based on the Book of Ecclesiastes. Folks, I generally have little use for celebrities. I think our culture has become way too celebrity-centric and in a near worshiping manner. But my connection to celebrities is their art. I do appreciate what they do. If they are putting out worthwhile art, that is my connection to them. And I know that they have or they generate a bond between us, providing a focal point on one person. So I generally don't get into them much, but this week, David Cassidy passed away at the age of 67. I believe his complications due to Alzheimer's. I know he had dementia and was fading. But according to his daughter, his final words were, quote, "so much wasted time," end quote. I've talked a lot about this in past commentaries about the end of life and what we're doing while we're living, and that is a common theme throughout Ecclesiastes. This week, though, I thought immediately of Ecclesiastes 7:4 when I heard David Cassidy's quote. Ecclesiastes 7:4 reads, "The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth." Now, I'll be honest, when I was first drawn to the book of Ecclesiastes, this was one verse that really I struggled with tremendously. I didn't understand why it would be wise to be in the house of mourning, to be at a funeral, to mourn the dead, and foolish to enjoy life and enjoy mirth. But what I have come to learn is that every life, whether it is a celebrity or just a family member, every single life leaves behind lessons for those remaining. Now, those lessons could be big, could be small. They could start with the word do, or they could start with the word don't. Look at this person who just passed, and his life or her life, and should the lesson be do this and do that because they did and it was successful for them, or don't do this or don't do that because it cost them during their life. And that is what we're talking about here in Ecclesiastes 7:4. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, because you go to review this person's life, and what are the lessons there for us? And David Cassidy's final words really struck me. So much wasted time, and I do believe that we do that. I do believe we get so caught up in Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and politics and this tweet and that Facebook post and all of the nonsense into which we put so much of our time and effort. And it's ultimately just a chasing after the wind. You probably could not remember what the stories were last week from this broadcast. You probably can't remember the tweet that everyone was talking about 7 days ago from Donald Trump. It's chasing the wind. Why are we spending our time doing that? Because if you continue to do that, If every one of your Facebook posts are about Donald Trump, if every conversation is littered with politics, and it could be, and it's more than politics, but I do see politics growing in intensity and just in volume of our conversation. It has taken up so much of our lives, and it is all just vanity. It is meaningless, all meaningless, and ultimately a chasing after the wind. What has been, is, and will be again. There's nothing new under the sun. So why are we spending so much time with that when there's so much more to life out there? So I again go back to the verse: the house of the wise, or the heart of the wise, is in the house of mourning. So do examine the lives of the people, whether it be loved ones or disconnected celebrities or whatever. But every single life has a lesson. And I guess from a secular point of view, we want our lives to end up with more do's than don'ts. But from a Christian perspective, obviously, it depends on our soul and our faith in Christ. But the house of mourning is where the wise will go, and not dwell there. Not spend all your time there, but to look at the lives that have passed and what lessons can we draw from them. And David Cassidy's final words are very, very poignant. I really do believe that they're very, very poignant. So much wasted time. That was the last thing he wanted to make sure that he said to his loved ones. And so what was going through his mind when he said that? So I guess the question that first comes to mind when you hear this, when you hear his quote, is, what was he talking about? How had he wasted his time to such a degree that his final words are so much wasted time? That was the last thing he wanted to make sure his family, his loved ones who were with him, heard from him. So much wasted time. And I think a good exercise for us, if we are going to be wise and be in the house of mourning and learn from this man's death and his final words, I think a good exercise is today, imagine yourself in that hospital bed, knowing that your life was slipping away. And if you were to make that quote, so much wasted time, what was the wasted time in your life that would cause you to say that at the end of your life? What are you wasting time on? Is it Facebook posts about Donald Trump? Or is it tweets about Nancy Pelosi? Is it about politics? Is this constant chasing after the wind? All of this meaningless dialogue. Now, don't get me wrong. I know policy and politics is important, and we need to be aware and well educated and informed on the topics. And open discussion is always good. But I think you would agree, I hope you would agree, that we have gone so far away from that, and that politics has infested way too much of our dialogue and our lives. And we should probably ask ourselves, is that what we want our lives to be? Is that the highlight reel we want to look back on at the end of our lives? Because we probably won't remember a single topic or a single thing that was so important to us in that moment. So I would encourage you to live a life that leaves behind more do's than don'ts, and above all, just appreciate every moment, every day that God has given us. And don't forget, in the Word, He tells us to count our days, not our years, not our decades, how long we live, but count our days. And that means today. So get out there. Do not have a great day, folks. Get out there and make it a great day. Thanks so much for being with me, and I'll talk to you soon.